figured I would take advantage of it and start. I'm glad he made it because I wasn't sure what I was going to say to by time until he got here. So I was going to look up jokes, or I was going to have Colton come up and tell some jokes that probably would have been better.
I had car problems. There were cars in front of me. That was
So for those of you that weren't here yesterday, we learned about what Robert's Church at New Danville Mennonite, some of the new things that they're doing and some of the things that they're trying to draw people from the outside in, using the gifts and talents that the people in their church already have. Instead of kind of making the program fit the people, they use the people to make the programs. And what it made me think about was in Luke, when Jesus calls Levi and eats with the sinners. Luke 5:27 says, after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting in his tax booth. Follow me, Jesus said to him, and Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. And Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with him. But the Pharisees and the teacher of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? Jesus answered them, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So Jesus wasn't hanging out with all of the buttoned up healthy people. He went and found the people that needed him most. Can make church get a little messy. You can have people that wouldn't normally be at church, but those are the people that we want to be at church. I like what he said last night about needing to be uncomfortable with some things so that the people that you want to come are comfortable. So let's just take some time to pray, and then we'll get started. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for tonight, God. I thank you for just your provision. God, I thank you for bringing us here safely. God, I just pray that you speak through Robert. God, I pray that you would help us to listen. I pray that you would help us to act on the things that you want us to act on. God, I pray that you'd put a fire in our hearts to reach the people around us and to see them come to a saving faith in you. In your name we pray. Amen. So I think we'll have the worship team up first, and then we'll have Robert to go after that. Wait for it. Dear Lord, thank you for Robert, God. I thank you for bringing him here safely, not slowly. God, we just pray that you would be with him tonight. God, I pray for a special touch of you on his speaking tonight. God, I just pray that you would flow through him. God, and I pray that we would be willing listeners and just hearing what you have to say through him. In your name, amen.
Is it okay if I pull this cord out? I won't need the screen. So I can go without breaking anything? Cool. Okay, well, it's good to see you all again. Like, you came back. I was like, how many people will be there the second time? I wasn't sure. It is good to be here with you. And what we're going to do is I want to do some character sketches of a couple people out of the Bible first. And then we're going to do a little table talk time and just see what maybe some next steps are here. I did want to show you this, by the way. A huge topic in our church. I don't know how it is for your church. When should you hang your Christmas lights? Okay? Now, here's what we do at New Danville. We have marble surveys. Okay, so that's the question. When should you hang your Christmas lights? And I've got 4 choices for you. After Halloween, after Thanksgiving, bah humbug, Christmas lights waste electricity. We're Mennonite after all, right? And they're still up from last year. There's always one, right? So I already dropped mine in after Thanksgiving. What I want you to do a little bit later tonight when we're doing refreshments, or if you feel so moved, the Spirit brings you up here whenever you want. Come up and take a marble and choose. And I think, is it okay, Pastor Phil, if we leave it up tomorrow morning, that we can find an obnoxious place to put it? And let's see how the survey goes. We actually had to take a break from this. We use this for some serious stuff too. Like, how do you feel about abortion? How do you feel about Christians in politics, stuff like that. But we've done fun stuff. What's your favorite pickup truck? And some of our members, they really sort of got into the spirit of it, not God's spirit, their own, because we did the one with the pickup trucks, and we had like Ford, Chevy, Dodge, and then we had Toyota. So somebody being funny grabbed a whole bunch and dropped them in Toyota, when nobody in our church dropped a Toyota. So, okay, everyone had a laugh, ha-ha, they stuffed the ballot box. But then the next week got a different question, and somebody did the same thing, and the next week they did the same thing. So I had to reprimand them and say, stop doing that, it's not funny anymore. We want to see where these surveys really go. But this just is another way that we just try and include people in things. So we'll often have this out in the lobby space, and people go by and they'll make a choice. And on the way out, it's very interesting for everyone to walk by and go, oh, we have more Eagles fans than Steeler fans. We have any Steeler fans in here? Are there any men's teams that you like? I did mention I'm from Philadelphia, right? It's okay, I'm a true Philadelphia sports fan. When they're winning, they're great, and when they're losing, they're bums. So it's just how we are there. It's going to take a lot of work from everybody if you're really going to be a growing church. It's a lot of work at New Danville. Where we have not arrived yet. We have a lot of struggles. We're very short on volunteers in a lot of areas, including children's ministry. I don't know how that is for you. Sometimes it's really hard. I felt better after going to Willow Creek Church once. Remember we talked about them last night, about 20,000 members in Chicago. And we were sitting with Bill Heibels, and he said, look, I know a lot of you are hurting because you don't have enough volunteers and you wish you were us. He said, let me tell you, this weekend I'm short of 500 volunteers. So same problems, different scale. But it's going to take work from everyone. And tomorrow when we speak, we're going to talk about what it's like to create an atmosphere for visitors. Because church is challenging for a lot in this generation who have never gone to church. For some of us, it's very easy. I can go visit a church, and I can pretty much figure things out pretty well. I can find the bathrooms on my own. I sort of know when to stand up, when to sit down, for the most part. Although once, I was doing a funeral for a very prestigious person in Lancaster City. And we were in an old Episcopal church, And it was one of those really traditional ones. It still had like booths where some families had their own booth to sit in. So since I was like the respected pastor, they put me alone in this booth up front. And they decided to do communion. Well, they knew they were going to do communion. I didn't know they were doing communion in the middle of a funeral. I'd never done that before. So they actually had like sort of Episcopal priests. You know, Episcopal, that's sort of like Catholic life kind of thing, you know, diet Catholic. And anyway, we go up, and the priest he's standing there. And the cups are already laying there. So I'm the first one because I'm the guest. So I go up and I'm standing there, and you know, I've got 400 people staring at my back, and the priest doesn't do anything. So I'm waiting. I guess I just pick it up and drink it. So I picked it up and went like this, and there was nothing in it. You had to pick it up and hold it, and then he filled it. That was their tradition of doing it. So I look like, whatever. It's the same for people when they come into your church. Do you make it easy for them to fit in? We're very used to how things are in the church. It's very simple, right? Even if it's a new church, if you're a believer, you kind of have most of it figured out. For somebody who's never gone to church before, it's intimidating. It really is. So we want to work on ways to make the church very inviting. And part of what we're doing tonight is also talking about, well, how do we get those people even to get through the door so it can be very inviting for them. But that means, as I said, there's a lot of work for you. Because this can't just be a pastor task. The whole church has to work at this. Paul told the Corinthians this. He said, the body is a unit, though it's made up of many parts. You guys are familiar with this verse, right? And he said, although those parts are many, they form one body. So it is with Christ. We're all baptized into one spirit and one body, whether Jews, Greeks, slave or free, we're all given the same spirit to drink. Now, the body is made up of not one, but many parts. If the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. So in other words, what Paul is trying to get across here is that we all have our part to do. It's important for all of us to be working in the church. And I know, as we said last night, not everyone is an evangelist, but everyone's going to have to reach out on some level to somebody. It's important. And I want to talk to you about 3 attitudes tonight that are going to help with that. 3 things you need to be. And because I started out as a Baptist pastor, they all start with the letter A. Because Baptist pastors, we love to make everything sort of work that way. We're very comfortable like that. So the first person I want to talk about is Lydia. I've got 3 characters who are going to bring out these 3 attributes. Are you familiar with Lydia in Acts chapter 16? She has a very short part in the Bible, but she is supremely important. Let me read just a few verses to you. And this is Paul and his companions. Luke is writing this. It says, from there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia. And we stayed there several days. Now on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message, and when she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. Now, this is an interesting story. See, Paul's traveling through Macedonia, and he's trying to start new churches. Remember we talked about apostles last night? Apostle was somebody who went town to town spreading a certain doctrine, right? And for us, it's the doctrine of Christ. So Paul gets to Philippi, and it says they go outside of the city gates because they expect to find a place to pray. Now, why is that? In Jewish culture at the time, you could not have a synagogue unless you had at least 10 families in the city. 10 male-led families. So if there were widows, they didn't count. Sorry, ladies, that's just kind of the way it was. So you had to have 10 Jewish families before you could start a synagogue. If you didn't, you couldn't meet inside the city. You went outside the city gates, and you would find a place to pray. And usually it'd be near a river or someplace that was convenient. So that's why Paul goes out to the river and he meets Lydia. Now, Lydia was already somewhat of a believer in God, but she didn't know about Christ yet. She hadn't had that full revelation. So Paul talks to her, and she gets convinced, and her family is baptized, and she gets connected with Paul. Now, the interesting thing about Lydia was she was an important person, because it says she was from Thyatira, and she dealt in purple cloth. Now, why that's important is because Rome had sumptuary laws at this time. Sumptuary laws kind of govern society. And one of the laws was you could only have so much purple. See, purple was an expensive dye to make. And Thyatira was known for its dye works. And purple was very rare. See, purple in those days, the way you made it was you had to find a little murex. It was a little mollusk, lived in a little shell about that big, or less than a half of an inch. And it would take thousands of these. And they'd get them in a vat, and they'd crush them up either with their feet or with other utensils, and break them up, so they get just this little tiny bit of liquid out of them. And that's how they would make purple dye. So thousands of these little murex shells just to make a little vial of purple dye. So as you can imagine, purple was an expensive piece of cloth. And Lydia dealt in purple. Now, because it was so expensive and so rare, of course, the rich kind of wanted to take advantage of that. So the sumptuary law said, if you were the emperor, or perhaps his family, you could wear as much purple as you wanted. Now, if you were one of the publicans, one of the top politicians, you could have a sash or a band in purple. Depending on your rank, you might say how big or how small it was. If you were part of the equestrian league, you could have maybe, a ribbon. A lot of times it was for the equestrians' wives. They would have a little ribbon of purple somewhere on them. Now, if you were one of the regular people, the plebeians, like us, you were not allowed to wear purple at all. So some of you are in violation tonight, I can see. Some of the laws were very strict. Now, you could have a fine, you could have jail time. There were times if you upset enough people, it could result in death. Purple cloth, right? So this was a big deal. So the fact that Lydia had a license to sell and trade in purple cloth meant she was a very prominent person. She may have been related to somebody high up, we don't know. But at the very least, she was a woman of means. So she probably had quite the nice estate. So here is Lydia, this new believer, doesn't know a lot yet about the gospel, but knows she's been moved by God and the Spirit, and wants to do something to help. Now here's the thing, Paul and his companions, they were travelers. And the way travelers would work back then, they didn't go to Motel 6. Nobody left the light on for them, right? What they would do is they would stay at the home of somebody they were witnessing to. That's how pastors moved around in those days. We're like the circuit riders that we used to have. So Lydia goes up to Paul and she says, if you count me worthy, come stay at my house. So Paul and his companions stayed at this lovely home, I'm sure it was, and hung out with Lydia. And a little bit later on, it tells you in the chapter, Paul and Silas and the others, they got in trouble, like they always do, ended up in jail. But when they got out of jail, where do you think they went back to? Lydia's house. So later on, in Paul's travels, when he's in prison actually, he writes the book of Philippians, which is a letter written to a church in Philippi. More than likely, that church started in Lydia's house. Lydia helped found one of the churches we hear about in the New Testament. How crazy cool is that? Right? She wasn't a preacher, but she used the gift she had. So the first thing I want to tell you is make sure you're available. And use your availability and your ability. You don't have to be pastor, you don't have to be a worship leader. Whatever gift God has given you, take action. Don't hold it back, take action. If there was a theme verse for Lydia, it would be 1 Peter 4. Each one should use whatever gift he's received to serve others, faithfully administering God's grace in its various forms. If anyone speaks, he should do it as one speaking the very words of God. If anyone serves, he should do it with the strength God provides, so that in all things, God may be praised through Jesus Christ. So Lydia, it was all about ability. She used the ability she had to reach people. I had a lady like that 2 churches back, and it's actually kind of a crazy story. I found out she was sort of my mother-in-law. How does that happen? My father was a millionaire. This is true. Not like my other stories. This is really true. He left before I was a year old. Over the last few years, we found out there's at least 6 of us that he left behind. Worked for a big computer company, and they liked you to be a family man in those days. So he would marry somebody, but when kids came along, he sort of left and went on his own way. When he died, he found out he only lived 10 minutes from me. And I was in computers, and he had his own computer brokerage. It was kind of neat. So anyway, I got in contact with his last wife. He had several wives. And she came to the church, and she really wanted to help. And one thing she had was my father's mansion. And we were trying to reach our community. This was back when we had the movie theater. And we said, what can we do to reach some folks that want to come to our church? And one thing that was big at the time was darts. A lot of people go to bars and throw darts. And we thought, well, what if we gave them a safer place to throw darts? So she opened up her basement, which is really cool. It had like a skee ball machine and all this other, all the stuff you'd love to have in your own basement. And we threw darts there. It was fun. So we had a guy that started coming out. He used to throw in a bar, and he would come throw and rub shoulders with us, and we'd tell him about church. It was exciting the one night, we were trying to teach this one lady how to play darts, and she kind of gripped the dart. It was almost kind of scary, you know what I mean? So we're like, hold it gently, hold it gently. So she held it so gently, it fell out of her fingers, and she had flip-flops on. Yeah, right in the toe. It was terribly awesome. We thought so. She used the gift she had, gift of hospitality. Think about what you have that you can use for God. I mean, I play Hot Wheels with kids. If you can turn that into a ministry, you can turn anything into a ministry. Now, the goal is, don't just use it for what it is. Make sure you're using it for God. But we have a world out there that is used to being entertained, right? We go from this to that to the other thing. Let's show them some entertainment that's in a godly way. Use your gifts. So, for Lydia, it was ability. Second person I want to talk about is Epaphroditus. Do you remember Epaphroditus? Paul talks about him in Philippians. It says, I think it's necessary to send back Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. I'll skip some of the other verses here, but do you remember what happened? Epaphroditus was sent by the Philippians, right, Lydia's church, to Paul to help him out. Well, while he's with Paul, he was really sick. You're on the road, you're doing stuff, you don't have MedExpress there, and he almost died. Almost died. And the Philippian church hears about this, and they're concerned for him. So when Paul writes his letter to the Philippians from jail, he says, I'm going to send the letter with Epaphroditus, because I can't go myself, I'm in jail, but I'm sending Epaphroditus back to you. And he says the reason he's sending him back is because Epaphroditus was so concerned for the Philippians because they heard he was sick. Now it's kind of crazy, isn't it? He's the one that almost died, but he's worried about the Philippians because they heard he's sick. He's concerned for them when he's on his deathbed. That's an attitude of sacrifice. It's an attitude. And when we get involved in ministry, we need to look for those kinds of attitudes. Check our attitude. Are we in this for the right reason? Epaphroditus was in it not for himself, but to serve. If there was a theme verse for Epaphroditus, it would be Philippians 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also the interests of others. Now it's interesting, it doesn't say consider your brothers and sisters better than yourself. It just says others. So it's not just talking about Christians. It's talking about anybody in the world. Because truly, are we better than anybody else? No, we just have some pretty cool knowledge, and Jesus saved us. Now we're working to be better, for sure. But what this attitude here is, let's raise other people up. Okay? Do you remember the story of the guy that gets robbed on the side of the road, the story of the Good Samaritan? And the first 2 priests go by, and they're like, I don't want to get involved in this. And then finally the Samaritan comes along, and he takes the guy and takes care of him. Do you remember what he does to get the guy to the hotel? He puts him on his donkey. So he actually literally is lifting this guy above himself to take care of him. That's how we have to start looking at people in our neighborhood. I know that's hard sometimes because a lot of people in our neighborhoods are hardened and they got some rough edges and life has been really lousy to them, so now they're going to be lousy to everybody else and they're hard to love. But how hard was it for Jesus to love us before we knew him, right? So let's make sure we're checking our attitude and we're loving people and putting them above ourselves. It's not always easy to do, I get it, but this is an attitude of sacrifice that we live. Okay, one last one. So we've got ability and we've got attitude. And the last one I want to talk about is Onesimus. Now remember Onesimus. This is a short book of the Bible, Philemon, one chapter. And this was an interesting book because Paul wasn't directly giving doctrine. What he was doing was writing to the owner of a runaway slave. When Paul meets this runaway slave named Onesimus, and Onesimus gets saved and becomes Paul's helper. But in the meantime, he realizes Onesimus belonged to one of Paul's old friends. And, a runaway slave could be killed for doing that. So Paul has this dilemma. Paul's still in jail when he writes Philemon, right? As he writes this letter. But he's like, well, I love Onesimus, but Onesimus is breaking the law. He ran away from his owner. Not that Paul condones slavery. It was just a reality of his time, right? The Bible doesn't condone slavery, but it works within the bounds of what was going on at the time, okay? So God didn't say, oh no, slavery's okay, but he worked through the fact that we had created slavery as man. That's a whole other topic. But in Philemon 8 it says this, therefore, although in Christ I could be bold and order you to do what you ought to do, set him free, yet I appeal to you on the basis of love. I then, as Paul, an old man and now a prisoner for Christ, I appeal to you for my son Onesimus, who became my son while I was in chains. Formerly he was useless to you, but now he's become useful both to you and to me. Now Paul's making a play on words, because Onesimus means useful. So Paul says, he used to be useless, but now he's living up to his name. He's useful. So you can see Paul's really working it here. He's like, I can command you to do this, but I'm going to trust you got a good heart, and you're going to let him go. So he sends him back, and he says, consider him a brother, and treat him that way. So the interesting thing about Onesimus was his alignment. He was aligned to help Paul. He had the right attitude, and he was in the right place at the right time. He had alignment. He was positioned to serve, and he had value to both Paul and to his owner. Even though he was a runaway, there was something he could do for Christ. So I think it behooves us to be the same way. We have to get in the proper alignment. Are we taking care of business in our own lives so that we're ready to help people in their lives? So in other words, Onesimus, he had to clean up this ledger. He couldn't just stay a runaway slave. That could have ended bad. Not only for him, but for Paul. Because Paul could have gotten in trouble for harboring a slave. So Onesimus had to get his life right. So he had to align that way. And then use that new freedom to serve others. So we have ability, we have attitude, and we have alignment. Each of us needs to work on those things. We need to figure out what it is you can do. Make sure you've got the attitude to do it. And make sure you're aligned and ready to go. Is your household in order? Did you ever fly on an airplane and the steward or stewardess gets up, or flight attendant they call them, I'm sorry, that's politically incorrect. The person that takes care of you on the plane, that has the little sodas and peanuts. When they get up at the beginning of the flight and they give you instructions in case something happens to the plane, that's always very reassuring. So I never fly on Boeing because of Boeing. That just doesn't sound like an airplane. And they tell you that if you lose cabin pressure, an oxygen mask comes down. And what do they always tell you about that? If you have a child, put your own mask on first, and then your child's mask. Now, why is that? Because when pressure drops, you're likely to pass out very quickly. And what they want you to do is if you try to get your child's mask on first and you're struggling because they're kind of in a panic, you might pass out before you can get it on them. So you put your mask on first, then you're in a position to help your child. You got to do it that way. And it's the same thing here. You've got to take care of yourself first and make sure you're right with the Lord so you're in a position to do the same for those around you. There was a professor once, he was in his office at a college, and one of the students came in for help. And he walked in, and the professor was studying. And the student said, "Professor, you're the professor. Why are you studying?" And the professor said, "Because I never want my students to drink from a stagnant pond." Always learning to those around us. So let's make sure as we go into this, you know what your ability is. You've got the attitude to use it. And you've aligned yourself so that you can use it. Got it? All right? Should we just go to snack now? Last night was all about me showing you a bunch of the stuff that New Danville is doing. And as I said, you don't have to do what New Danville's doing. And even if you did do what New Danville's doing, I can't guarantee it's going to work for you. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it's time for us to figure out where you are, where I hope it is you want to be, and how are we going to get there. So I thought we would have some table talk time tonight, if that's okay. And let's talk about that a little bit. The first thing I want to say is this. I want you to talk at your table and say, what are the things at our church that we do well? What do we do well? And I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to discuss that, and then we'll have some reports back here up front. Is that doable? Do you like the people at your table well enough that you can handle that? You should have thought about where you sat, shouldn't you? Yeah. And I'll sort of float around a little bit. So you have 5 minutes. I want you to talk about, really think here. What is it that you are gifted with by God? What do you do well, besides eating snacks? All right? You have 5 minutes. Go. Take about 30 seconds, 30 more seconds, wrap up your conversation.
I've got a history of caring for persons in the congregation. The illnesses or significant problems at a given time. The church kind of rallies around it. That's something that.
Okay, let's talk about this for a second. This is an interesting exercise because there are two things going on, and that's why I was kind of creeping around at your tables there. I'm a bit of a creeper, so it's not just figure out what you're good at, but for you to be able to identify that yourself. Like, do you know? Are you connected enough here to realize? Are you self-aware about what your church does and how you act? So anyway, somebody from one of the tables, tell me something that you do very well. Oh, I thought I saw a hand, but that was a hand trying to vote somebody else in. Yeah. Well, don't be bashful. Singing. Okay. Well, most people here agree with that? Are you guys good at singing? Okay. I mean, I'd agree just from what I heard here. This was simple, elegant worship. And I love that. Because that's authentic. Because you can have a huge band with all the bells and whistles, and, you know, that's kind of okay. But you can tell when people are being authentic about their singing when they're not. So it's really good. Okay, so singing. What else? What else do you do well? Yes?
Our fellowship meals.
Fellowship meals. I've heard that more than once, which has me excited since tomorrow is a fellowship meal. I really think Mennonite is the Greek word for food. I'm not positive, but I have a feeling that might be the case. What do you mean you do well at fellowship meals? What does that mean exactly? Like you eat well? I mean, there's several components to a fellowship meal. What do you do well?
there's a lot of interaction, I mean, even after a service, when there is no meal, nobody dashes out the door usually right away. Usually it's
Okay.
a lot of interaction.
So interaction, as in people are talking with one another, connecting, okay. And that happens at the fellowship meal as well? Does the fellowship meal go smoothly?
What do you mean?
Like the logistical part of it?
Depends who you ask.
Depends who you ask. I'm going back to the kitchen sink. But it's a real question. I mean, because there are some churches that have great fellowship meals, but they're burning people out in the meantime, and it's crazy in the kitchen, and you don't want to go anywhere near it, kind of thing, you know. Does it go well? You be honest. Yes, Beth?
I just came in 6 years starting the kitchen committee, and it was a delight.
What? Oh, bless you, my child.
We had good times. We do get along.
It does go smooth. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I was gonna mention this later, but I'm gonna mention it now since we're on the food services piece of this. There are two levels to these kinds of things. When you do a fellowship meal, you're building this community of people that are talking, they're either eating, having a good time, which is great, 'cause that's what Jesus did. But you're also building a community in that kitchen, right? Just like the training club I talked about last night, they do it for the kids, at least that's what they tell me. But when those guys get together during the week, some of these guys have a really rough life. One of them has a couple kids with special needs and stuff, and so for him just to get together with the guys and work on something as silly as little trains, it's a real ministry. And it's the same for kitchen ministry. A sad moment at New Danville was we were getting ready for a missions trip, and we decided to do a hoagie sale. Don't you guys call them out here hoagies? Is that a Philly term? Hoagies, whatever. It was really good sandwiches. And I had a friend come out, and she had just started to attend the church. I can't even say attend, she visited the church. And she decided to come help with the hoagie sale. So she got there, and she said, "What can I do to help?" And somebody in the kitchen said, "We've pretty much got it covered." So she pretty much stood there for 45 minutes with nothing to do. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure we invite people to help. And we have to be careful that the meal doesn't become more important than the member, right? Somebody might not put the sugar back in the right place, or they're using the wrong silverware. But what's more important was, did the ladies in that kitchen get closer together? Was it a positive experience? And I'm not picking on just kitchen ministry, okay? This is for all of our ministries. So there's those two levels here. There's those being served and those who are serving. When serving becomes a positive experience, that's when volunteerism really takes off. And that's where growth really happens. You get more growth from serving than you do from being served. And we want to have growth, of course. But watch for it. Watch for it. So I'm glad to hear about the fellowship meals. That is huge. Fellowship meals are huge, and especially if your community gets to know it. One thing I didn't check, I checked some of your demographics here, I didn't check for poverty level. But families who know consistently that they can get a free meal at a certain location will start to come to that consistently, if they know about it, and if they feel comfortable while they're there. Fellowship, no, that's huge. I'm really glad to hear that you do that. What else do you do well? Yes?
I think we've done a really good job with our youth. Currently, somewhere between 10 and 15 of our young people who are in college or service. And they're
Okay.
not present with us right now, but we've prepared them to go out into finding their place in life.
Okay. It is a challenge, I'll mention that, by the way. From ages 18 to 22 is the largest demographic where you lose people in the church. A couple of reasons. First off, either college, career, they move away, and honestly, they get challenged with world values. And sometimes you lose them that way too. So if you're really preparing them well in youth group, I assume when we say youth, we're talking teenagers, that is huge. Because we're having a hard time keeping teenagers in church. It is tough. They face a lot in school and peer pressure, but you know the deal. Okay, so you are doing a good job with youth. So you have a youth group that meets periodically, or they do Sunday mornings, or how does that work?
Every other Wednesday.
Every other Wednesday. Nice. I'll talk more about that later. All right, anything else? What else do you do well?
We care for each other's needs.
Okay, yeah, I heard that back here too. You carry each other's burdens, and how do you explain that a little bit more to me?
So for us personally, our little girl there was very, well, Heidi went into labor very early and ended up in the wrong tongue with us.
Shame on you.
And some of the ladies from church gave entire days to come and stay with her so that I could go to work and meals and, yeah, the whole 9 years.
Oh, that's amazing. That's, we were saying that, in fact, that's the Acts chapter 2 church, right? Because they sold their possessions, gave whoever had need, and we look at that as a model. We don't necessarily sell everything and live in a commune. It's a different culture now. But that represents that when you do that, when you carry somebody else's burdens. And that's huge, because if you have a church that doesn't take care of each other, who would want to be a part of that, right? And Paul said that. He said, take care of the believer first, and then the outsider. And I think it is important, because some churches have argued over that. No, we need to take care of the outsiders first. We don't want to look too inward. Now, I disagree. You need to take care of those inside first, if you want other people to become part of what you have inside. Otherwise, why would they want to come? I saw one church, this back in the Philadelphia area, they had a big split, and a fist fight broke out in the church. Well, who wants to go there? You know, unless you're serving popcorn and you watch the excitement. When people, they need to see the love you have for each other. So that is huge. Thank you. That is a big one. Anything else? I think we've gotten a lot of the basics down. So you would tell me, based on all that, you are a fairly tight-knit community. Can I go as far as to say that? You take care of each other's burdens. You are somewhat multi-generational, which I like to see too. That's really great. You have meals together, you talk. Let me ask this one. When you talk afterwards, because New Danville faces this, we have people that stay and talk. Our trustees now, they just turn the lights off and set the doors to lock, and they leave. There's a lot of people there an hour, even longer sometimes talking. 100 people talk. Oh my. If a new person were to come in, do they get involved in that conversation? Not that they're going to stay an hour for their first time there. Are you open enough to them? Like so you guys all saw me already, but if I were to come to your church tomorrow and you'd never seen me before, what do you think my experience would be? Yes?
Confusing.
Really?
I find, well, okay, that's probably going too much by myself. I find all experiences of that kind of confusing, so.
Okay.
Probably wasn't very helpful.
Be a little more specific. So I come in, are people going to greet me?
Yes.
Okay. So, does it go any beyond that? Because I have some people tell me, well, every time a new person comes, I say, thank you for being here, please come again. And that's great. But the lady at McDonald's says the exact same thing. And seriously. And it is, I'm glad. I mean, you do. You want to go up, and not everyone can stand there and talk to them for 10 minutes, or they'd be here all day and they'd be a little weirded out by that. But I do think it takes a little more, because I will tell you, I don't think there's a church I've gone to yet and spoken with that didn't say, we're a friendly church. Well, how friendly? Everyone says that. So what are you doing for these new folks? Or do you find a way to connect with them? Just some advice on some of that. Find out what their interests are. And don't be afraid to write it down later. Don't write it down in front of them. Oh, your child's name is, it's a little creepy. But maybe make a note later. We have that on our bulletin. On the back of our bulletin, it has notes for the sermon, and then people I met and will pray for. There's a little space to write in who that was. Because we want to get beyond just, hi, how you doing, thanks for being here. You get that anywhere. You want to start to connect with people. We often, I say we, a few of us, we're still working on this, will invite people out for lunch afterwards. And some take us up on it, some don't, some that's a little too much. Okay, not yet. You know, we're not there yet. Because I do find a lot of our guests, they're in and they're out fast. Because they don't know if they trust you yet. Right? Because we know we trust each other. We know we're awesome. They don't know you're awesome. Right? They don't even know if God is awesome yet. Some of them. They're trying to figure that out. So there's this balance in that, but we often do, we invite people out to lunch. I felt bad, I was really pushing that on my people. And we had this one lady in our church, and she opened up in prayer one time, because I wasn't sure if she was inviting the people or not. She said, you know what, Pastor, I make a meal at home every Sunday so I can invite people, but then I chicken out every Sunday because I'm afraid to ask them. And it just, it broke my heart, because I knew she really does care, but it is hard, isn't it? Sometimes with somebody new, because you don't know if you can trust them either. But we do have to step out. And let me say this, like I said last night, it's on us to take the step. If we're waiting for the outsider to take the step, we're gonna be waiting a long time. Right, because we open the church doors, okay, everybody come in. It doesn't happen that often. We need to be ones taking the step and sacrificing to ask them to come in. So I would suggest to you, make sure you do have a little bit of a deeper conversation. Now, I know not everyone here is a conversationalist, and I get that. If conversation is not your thing, just say, can I get you a coffee or a cookie, or, and just say, we are glad that you're here. But somebody should really engage them. Say, so where do you work? Most people are okay with answering those questions. That's kind of the stuff I'll ask. Or sometimes, I'm crazy enough, because I have that odd personality. I'll say, tell me the weirdest thing ever about you. And I can say that to a perfect stranger. I say it to waitresses all the time. And it's funny, because they'll think for a second. And because first they're thinking, why does he think I do weird stuff? But usually they'll warm right up to me on that, and they'll come up with something crazy. And people ask me, and I'm like, well, I once threw a Texas beauty queen into the Atlantic Ocean. And then the story comes, and I really did that once. That's asked me sometime. It was weird. And her husband was okay with it, and that was important, because he was a big Texan guy. But ask some questions, and don't be afraid to ask them out for lunch. It might cost you a little money, but what's a soul worth? You know, Billy Graham years ago, he rented Vet Stadium in Philadelphia. And you know, Billy Graham things like tens of thousands of people came out. Well, at the end, they did an altar call, and all these people got saved, and they counted up all the people that got saved. And then they looked at all their expenses to rent the stadium and everything else that went on with it, and they realized it cost them $157 per salvation. Now, I know that's a little weird. But think about it this way for a second. If you could get somebody saved by spending $157, how many times would you spend $157? You know what I mean? Don't be afraid to spend a little on somebody. Don't be afraid, and it doesn't have to be money. Maybe you're just sacrificing time. I don't know. You missed the beginning of the Eagles game. That's tough, but it can happen. We are the ones who have to step out if we're going to build relationships. That's why Paul didn't set up shop in Jerusalem and wait for people to come. He went places. That's what apostles do. So we need to do that. But then if somebody does come through our door, well, you better show them hospitality plus. Because you know you're a loving church, but they don't know that yet. We've challenged our people at times, and we've said, you know what? For the first 3 minutes after church, you can't talk to anybody you know. Now, in the beginning, that was awkward because everybody knew everybody. We didn't have any guests yet, so it was a little bit hard to find somebody. But we still throw that challenge out every once in a while, because isn't it easy to go talk to your buddies? I mean, I do the same thing. There's people right after church I know I want to talk to, because we've got a relationship. But I try not to now. I go look for somebody. And I think that's the key, is making sure you are inviting people into the circle. This was key when I had youth group. At my last church. I was youth pastor there for 9 years. I think I told you, Equity BIC. Some nights we'd run as many as 150 teenagers. We had this big 50s diner. The kids would come and hang out. It was crazy, right? There's advantages to big youth groups. There's disadvantages. So this one night, I'm there, and we have this new girl. And she was not goth. She was sort of punk rockish, back in the punk rock days. So she had the tartan skirt, the fishnets, and the combat boots. Right? So she's there, and she's got a soda, and she's backed up against the wall as if she wants to sink into it. Because it was one of our big nights. You know, there was well over 100 teenagers, and she's just overwhelmed. So I play cool past her, because I don't have to play it. So I go up, and I just leaned up against the wall next to her, and I just said, wow, crowded tonight, don't you think? And she said, yep. Walked away from me. Let me tell you something. A month and a half later, we were sitting on the stage, side by side, as she opened her heart to me and told me that her mom was divorced. She lived just with her mom. Her mom worked in a correctional facility and was not home at night. She worked second shift. So this girl was really missing having a mom. And we had a huge heart-to-heart over this. And she's a beautiful girl to this day. But it took some time to step into her world. And it didn't work the first time. Don't be put off by that. It takes time for people to trust. But you gotta put the best foot out there. Enough said about that. I'm starting to get kind of preachy. I feel preachy. Do I sound preachy? I'm a pastor. That's how it works. Okay. Those are some good things. So are we satisfied? Do you think you've encapsulated who you are pretty well? Hello? It sounds like you've got the good marks here. We don't have a ton of time, but I'm gonna do another question here. I would like you to share with your table what gifts and abilities you have, and that includes hobbies. So let me say gifts, abilities, and interests. Because I don't know that Hot Wheels is one of my gifts, but it's one of my interests. And it's turned into something. So you know where this question is kind of going. So take just a couple more minutes at your table, what your abilities are and your interests. And share them. That would be right now. Yeah. Somebody share with me. Somebody share a talent that somebody else said at your table. That way they don't have to bring it up themselves and feel like they're doing it. Yes?
Marlene plays the accordion.
Get out of town. That's really neat. That is a gift. That really is. Wow, okay. All right, well, hang on to that for a second. What else? Wow, you are talentless people. Oh, what's that? Nurse's aide, taking care of elderly. Okay. That takes a special person. That's a building deacon right there. We can talk later. Okay, what was it you were gonna say?
These two ladies both like to write.
Do you like to write? Okay, neat.
He likes to preach and
Good guess, trying to cook it all. Do people like to hear him preach? Do they hear him? Oh, yeah. What else?
sports.
Sports?
Baseball.
Okay, baseball, all right. Anything else? I know there were more discussed out there. We don't have to go over them all, it's okay, but are there any others you want to share?
Cooking.
Cooking? Love you. And we've covered some of that with the mealtime and all. Okay, well, let's just talk about a few of these here. I did hear somebody, by the way, say, right away, they said, goof off. Who said, admit it? Yeah, right. Right, in sign language, we're the same.
Yeah. I enjoy having fun,
See that? Okay.
making people laugh. Yeah.
That's a gift. Unless it's just when they look at you and then
Well,
they're.
that's why I keep changing my appearance.
Wow, every church has one.
Cowboys fan.
Cowboy, I heard they have one. Yeah, okay, we'll talk about that later. So let's just discuss a few of these. Writing is huge. How do you use writing? How could that be used? I mean, right away, I think writing letters to people. I have a lady that does that for me because I'm not good at it unless it's in crayon. If somebody new comes, we write them a letter. If somebody is sick, we write them a letter. I also have writers. I have this one young gentleman. He's got some special needs. And he likes to write poems and things, and we're going to start to integrate them in between our worship songs, because he writes about God. So maybe a worship song, and then one of his writings. Something like that is amazing. The gift of writing is, when you master communication, is there any greater gift, really? So, not that I want to build you up too much. But you need to find ways to use that, because writing is becoming a bit of a lost art, especially if you write by hand. If you write a card to somebody, that means a lot, more than just typing an email. And I admit, because I'm an IT guy from the way back, it's easier for me to send you an email, a text, or a Facebook chat. But a handwritten letter, beautiful thing, right? So please use the gift of writing, that is huge. What else is in here? The nurse, we talked about that. You know, working in with a deacon team, when you have somebody that cares, that's important and knows how to care. You know, most pastors don't. 80% of pastors, I think this was a statistic, don't quote me, but like 80% of pastors score very low in the mercy gifts. We're not really good at mercy all the time. And sometimes that's kind of important because when we deal with so much, if we had that much mercy all the time, it would probably destroy us, you know? But you need people in the church that do have mercy and have that gift of caring. That is huge. People like that are great at coordinating meals for folks, or just being with folks. It's, you know, when you spend time with somebody, it's huge. We were just with somebody, we have a friend that has cancer, had a stroke, all kinds of, can barely communicate, and a bunch of his friends went over and visited with him, and they really couldn't say anything, but they just hung out and watched TV together in the hospital group. Wasn't much communication, but you know what? It meant a lot, because they just were together. And it was, in a way, a sense of normalcy in a desperate situation. This gentleman, short of God, he's not going to make it, the doctor's already said. But to have that little quality time is important. So look for those people that have those kinds of gifts. Man, it's huge. It's huge. Let's talk about the goofing off a little bit. If you're a flake, it's a gift. Let me tell you. That has men's ministry all over. And it has a lot of other ministries on it. We have a group of guys that we get together for barbecue once a month. We just find a barbecue place and we go. There's no other agenda, at least not one on the surface. And these guys, they go and they eat and they have fun and they laugh and they go home. And while that sounds very simple, the reality is we've had guys in our recovery house there. We do have guys with special needs children that are there. We have single guys, married guys, and it's just a chance for them to be the church and hang out. We need more guy time. You know, most churches are very feminine. In decorations, in everything, in the way we do stuff, we're very feminine. We wonder why we don't get guys all the time, right? 80% of ministry is done by women. And thank you, women, we need you. But we better start getting some men in this church. You know what I mean? So when I say this church, I mean our church overall. So men's ministry is great, and one thing that guys like to do is goof off. Most of them, but I know. Maybe it's just because it's me. But at this last one, we came up with a new idea. Now, I don't expect you to copy this. Don't try this at home. But we're doing office chair jousting. So one of the guys works for a bank, and they're throwing out a bunch of office chairs. And the rest of us are contributing by saying we don't know what to do with our time. So we're going to get together and we're going to have office chair jousting and we're going to videotape it and we're using our little GoPro cameras like we did in the Hot Wheels. And and what possible spiritual value does this have? Well, you know what it does? It just creates a sense of camaraderie for the men. And I find men are not good at camaraderie in general. Now, women are great. If a woman is struggling, the women circle the wagons, and they're all together, and they're taking care of each other, right? I mean, for the most part, there's exceptions, I get it. Men, we can't do that, because that would be admitting weakness. I don't need anybody else, I'm fine on my own. And then we go off in the closet and cry, you know? It is hard for men to get together. So we are purposeful about finding ways to do that. And if you're a goof off, then goof off, in a good way. Because it's a chance for us to talk to guys, because sometimes these guys come out and they're like, it's a chance for them to vent a little, and then we share how we deal with our own families. And it's even kind of cool when the pastor does it, because do you think the pastor's family is perfect? Oh my. You talk to my wife, she'll fill you in, right? That's a huge ministry. And if we can get guys to come into the church that way, it's a wonderful thing. That's why we post our videos online and everything. We did a series once on the best way to hold your wife's pocketbook. Probably wasn't politically correct either. But we had, we had the toxic waste where you held house for you know. We had the thief where you try and hide it and you see it. Don't your wife sometimes ask you older person when she's in the bedroom, do you do that, ladies? Do you ever ask your husband? No. Well, what's wrong? Okay, I'm just telling you. So our group, our byline is we're putting the men back in men. So we do these helpful videos. But you know what? Laughter is incredible medicine. And we have a lot of people that just enjoy that. And what the other thing it does, it shows that we're real and that we're a little bit off the edge, and people like that. Because they're afraid if they come into church, there's all these perfect people in there, and how are they ever going to measure up? Or worse, they think there's all these hypocrites in there that are acting perfect and really aren't. So if we don't act perfect, then we're not being hypocrites, right? Of course, I always tell people say, I don't want to go to church because there's too many hypocrites. And I said, well, yeah, there are, and there's always room for another one. I said, there's we're all hypocrites in our own way. That hasn't worked at nobody's come to what I've said. It's probably not my best leader. You really need to be you and start using your gifts. You're going to reach people that I don't reach. I have my own type of people that I like to hang around with. I'm a bit of the misfit type because I was a misfit in school. I was picked on terribly. So I started to march to my own drumbeat, and now I embrace that. So that's why in our youth group, there were a lot of times where we did have kids that were punk or skaters or sort of on the outer edge, and they were my people. And I was great with that. But I also had other church leaders in my youth group who were soul to the earth, kind of, the ones that grew up in church. And I needed them too, because they could speak a language I couldn't speak. And they knew that they needed me, because they couldn't talk to the skaters or the gamers or the goths, the emos. They didn't know what an emo was. They thought that was a big bird, like an osprey. It's not. If you don't know, emo is short for emotional. It was sort of like goth that got even darker, and it's a whole other world. But we need each one of your personalities, because you're going to reach somebody that I'm not. And just like Onesimus, you're going to be aligned for that, because I don't work at your work. So I can't reach the people that you're working with, but you can. And do you talk about church? Does it come up in conversation? Like I said, when I'm in restaurants, I do that with the waitress. She'll come over, and I'll talk to her. Let's try it. This is probably going to bomb, but I'll do it anyway. I don't remember your name. Did you introduce yourself to me earlier? Oh, good. Okay. Because sometimes I blank out and I look like I'm paying attention. They're like, what's your name? Diane. I'm Robert. It's good to meet you. Do you come here often? That was really a cheap line, wasn't it? Yeah, every Sunday. Okay, yeah, yes. What do you like to do? For fun. When you're not here.
I like to read.
You like to read? Okay. What do you like to read?
Right now I'm reading Morella of Green Gables.
Wow, okay. That is not something I would read. Does it have any of the following? Sword fights, car chases, spaceships, or explosions?
None of the above.
Yeah, well, there you go. Now see, we're definitely different. Green Gables, really? Does it have any pictures in it? Saving grace here. I'm going to remember that about her. Next time I see her, I'm just going to read like, was that hard to do, really? It's just connecting and learning something about people. And then usually, not all the time, it depends on whether it feels right or not, I might ask them again. I always tell them about church. I'm like, well, I go to New Danville Mennonite Church. I know that sounds like a party waiting to happen, but actually we're a lot of fun. You should come sometime. Now, I just did that at the Linden Diner. I met a girl, her name is Jade. And I was there with a bunch of other youth pastors, which is a party waiting to happen. And what I know about Jade is her family sometimes goes to church. When they go to LCBC. She doesn't live very far from the restaurant. I think she takes a bus, but I'm not positive about that. And the most of the reason she doesn't go to church is because she works on Sundays. I told her to quit because I'm worth it. That didn't work. It wasn't hard. You can do that with your coworker. You can do it with the person who bags your groceries. You can do it with the guy on the street, right? It's not that hard. And what if they reject you? No. Like, it's not like Paul, you're not going to get stoned. You're not gonna get stripped naked, you're not gonna be thrown out of town. They might call you names. They might just ignore you. So what? Really? See you bounce back, there's other people. But if we don't ever try, where are we gonna get to? So I do it all, I'm always inviting people out to church. You know, they're not gonna come unless you invite them, just do it. So Diane, the next time I'm here, which will be tomorrow, hopefully I'll remember to ask you, how's the book going? Will you be reading tonight? Will you? Okay. Are you in a good part? But there's no explosions or parts. What's a good part? No. All right, do you want to ask, I'm sorry, I'm going off that. I want to ask one last question because we are going to have to end here because once again I've spoken too long. And let's just take 3 minutes for this, and this is a hard one. What does your community need? And I don't want the road, oh, well, they need Jesus. Yeah, we know that. What are the needs in your community? You got 3 minutes to figure that out, if you can. 3 minutes. What does your community, not mine, yours, need?
If you'd like to, change the checks to the common retirement fund,